What's up, guys? Welcome back to another taxonomy video. In this video we're going to look at the 5 phyla that I've listed off right here: Porifera, Cnidaria, Platyhelminthes, Nematoda, and Rotifera. If you have not already watched the previous video on learning about how to classify the 10 Animalia phyla, I would advise to watch that first. But using that information, let's look at these phyla and see what makes them unique and different from each other. So the first phylum we're going to look at is Porifera. This is the phylum of sponges. So the phylum Porifera is the simplest phylum that we have. They're the most primitive phylum. They don't have any tissues, and remember the word for that is parazoa. Every other phylum is metazoa. Because they don't have tissues, we don't need to worry about if they're diploblastic or triploblastic. And because they're not triploblastic, we don't need to worry about the coelom. So there's no coelom here. They're also asymmetrical, and remember, they're the only phylum that we have out of the 10 that are asymmetrical. Let's talk about their means of digestion. So in the last video, we talked about one-way or two-way digestion. In both of those types, you have a mouth, you have an opening. Well, these guys here, these sponges, they don't have a mouth. So they have something called intracellular digestion, which is the simplest type of digestion. So they rely on the flow of water through their bodies to gain food. And there's many types of reproduction for sponges. You have asexual reproduction, which involves one sponge, and that's where the sponge can break off a part of itself, like fragmentation, and that fragment, can grow into a new individual. They also undergo sexual reproduction, and they're hermaphroditic, meaning they produce both sperm and eggs, both types of gametes. So they release them externally into the environment, external fertilization. Those cells are going to fuse together to make a new organism. What else should we know about sponges that's going to be pertinent for us? Well, we should know that they're suspension feeders. Suspension feeders feed on particles suspended in water, going back to their intracellular digestive habits. They're also sessile during their adult stage of life, which means they're stationary, they just sit there and they do not move. A specialized cell that sponges have is a choanocyte, and those are cells that have flagella on them. So they're the ones responsible for moving water in and out of the sponge. As a defensive mechanism and structural support, they have spicules. These are sharp needle-like structures that keep predators away. The next phylum we're going to talk about is Cnidaria. Cool, so cnidarians are pretty awesome. So you have jellyfish, coral, hydras. Those are just a few key examples. Cnidarians, this is the first phylum that's going to be diploblastic, meaning they're metazoa, they have tissues. But we don't need to worry about a coelom yet because they're not triploblastic animals. Cnidarians have radial symmetry around a central axis, and they also have incomplete digestive tracts, also known as two-way digestion. Remember, this is just one opening, one mouth, and food is digested in the gastrovascular cavity. Like I stated in the previous video, reproduction can be highly variable within a phylum, so here we have both modes of sexual and asexual reproduction. What we should know, though, is that there's 2 stages of a cnidarian. It's either in the polyp stage, which is that sessile, stationary stage, not moving, or the medusa stage, and the medusa stage is that mobile stage. Here we have a good diagram illustrating the polyp and medusa stage of a cnidarian. Now, adult corals and sea anemones, those are going to be your good key examples of cnidarians found in the polyp stage. Polyps are primitive and sessile. They reproduce both asexually and sexually. Asexual reproduction is done by budding. The medusa stage, on the other hand, that's the mobile life cycle stage of a cnidarian, is different from the polyp stage in the fact that they reproduce only sexually. So you can see that egg and sperm here are released externally into the environment and fertilized to make a new offspring. What else should we know about cnidarians? Well, we should definitely know about their nerve net. So the nerve net, you can think of it like a primitive nervous system. So our nerves in our nervous system are grouped together, but in a nerve net, these nerves are spread apart. And so that allows the cnidarian to respond to physical contact and motion in the water. And remember, with a nerve net, a primitive nervous system in a radial symmetrical animal, you're not going to have cephalization, so these don't have a brain. You should also know that they have cnidocytes, which are specialized cells used for stinging. and that stinging structure is called a nematocyst. You might encounter the word hydrostatic skeleton. Now, what a hydrostatic skeleton is the buildup of fluid pressure that allows the body of cnidarians to move. So these are invertebrates, they need to move, they don't have any muscles, but they have a hydrostatic skeleton, and that's responsible for their locomotion. Now we get to the third phylum, which is Platyhelminthes. This is a phylum containing worms. Some key examples of organisms found within this phylum are going to be trematodes, parasitic tapeworms, and flatworms, just to name a few. Now, with Platyhelminthes, we need to know that they're triploblastic animals. They're metazoa, meaning they have true tissues, and they're triploblastic, meaning they have endo, ecto, and mesoderm. They're not diploblastic, they're triploblastic, 3 layers. Because they're triploblastic, we now need to consider their coelom, their body cavity. Luckily for us, Platyhelminthes are acoelomates, which means they do not have a coelom present. As far as their body plans are concerned, they express bilateral symmetry. And in the last video, we discussed how bilateral symmetric organisms are always going to be triploblastic. On top of being bilateral symmetric, they also have cephalization. Remember, cephalization is the collection of nervous tissue towards that anterior head region. So their collection of nervous tissue is known as a centralized ganglia. You could think of this like a small little brain. Now here's something interesting. Their digestive system, their digestive tract, is a 2-way digestive tract. What does that mean? That means they only have one mouth, so they only have one opening for food. Food enters and exits through that one hole. It's digested in a gastrovascular cavity. As far as their reproduction goes, they can have both forms of sexual and asexual reproduction. If it's sexual reproduction, they can be hermaphroditic, where they produce both types of gametes. Another thing that you should know about Platyhelminthes is their nerve cords. They have 2 of them, and they span the length of their entire bodies. Now, these nerve cords are essentially just collections of nervous tissue. Another thing about Platyhelminthes that's unique is their excretory system. This is the first phylum so far that we've looked at that has a dedicated system for excretion. Their excretory system is made up of protonephridia. What a protonephridium is a collection of flame cells. A way to remember this is a protonephridium has the root nephron in it, and the nephrons are the functional units on our kidneys, which is dealing with excretion. So protonephridia, which is the plural form, nephridium, that's just dealing with excretion. So a protonephridium has a collection of flame cells. What are flame cells and why do they sound so cool? Well, I can't answer that second part, but I can answer the first part. And flame cells are specialized cells that aid in osmoregulation. So just a refresher on what osmoregulation is, it's the movement of substances across a semi-permeable membrane. So this is to and from the outside environment into the worm. Then the last thing, just remember that flame cells in a bundle, a collection of them, are called a protonephridia. This is going to help you out later on. Because I know you all love worms so much, we're going to look at another phylum of worms, and that is phylum Nematoda. Example of organisms found within this phylum are going to be roundworms, which should not be confused with earthworms, and hookworms. These are triploblastic animals, meaning they have an endo, ecto, and a mesoderm, which means we have to worry about their coelom. So what kind of coelom do they have? They are pseudocoelomates. What does that mean again? It means that their coelom is almost completely surrounded by mesoderm, but it's also touching the endoderm. Nematodes express bilateral symmetry in their body plans. That makes sense because they're triploblastic. However, not all bilaterally symmetric animals have cephalization, and nematodes are just that. So for the DAT, there is no cephalization found in nematodes, even though in some textbooks, they argue that they do have cephalization. So this is one of those gray areas in biology. I highly doubt you're going to have a question on cephalization and nematodes. However, what you should know is that there is a nervous system, and that consists of nerve cords. Now, nematodes have a complete digestive tract, often referred to as one-way digestion, meaning we have a mouth and an anus here. Sweet, so we finally get an anus in the Animalia phyla. Hey, you gotta get hyped over something when you're studying for this. So, reproduction, they have a wide range of reproductive habits, both asexual and sexual. One last thing that we should know about nematodes is that they have an exoskeleton cuticle. This acts as both a chemical and physical barrier to the external environment, and it's shed in a process known as ectasis. Now we get to phylum Rotifera. This is phylum number 5, so the last phylum that we're going to talk about in this video. So this phylum is often referred to as just the phylum of rotifers. Rotifers are small microscopic animals. Now rotifers are triploblastic. So since they're triploblastic, we have to worry about a coelom, and they're pseudocoelomates. They also express bilateral symmetry, which makes sense because they're triploblastic. Rotifers also have cephalization, or a collection of nervous tissue towards the anterior portion of their body. They also have a complete one-way digestive tract, so they have both a mouth and an anus. Food goes one way from the mouth to the anus. They also have a specialized structure for their mouths called a corona. It has ciliated cells on it that help sweep food into their oral cavity. Like all the other phyla, they have several types of reproduction, from sexual methods to asexual methods like parthenogenesis. Then last thing about rotifers is their excretory system. They have flame cells. Now flame cells together, what are they called? A bundle of them are called a protonephridium. So remember, flame cells, protonephridium, same thing. We're dealing with osmoregulation.